I don't know if you folks are familiar or have ever heard this before, but you'll always hear about, the first generation, second generation, even third generation wealth, right? And from time to time, you may even hear stories about, the first generation wealth builds a massive empire, but because of improper planning, the second generation between, moral struggles as well as, not having the assets in the right place where taxes were just completely insane. This happens because folks don't do proper planning in the space of how to leave it to the next generation. Today, we're going to talk about how to pass on my wealth after I've built it. And by the way, we want to be able to do that in the most efficient manner to avoid taxes and make sure that our next generation has the benefit of what we've took years to build. Because at the end of the day, we've seen it before. What could take 50, 100 years to build could go down in 1 or 2 days. I mean, listen, think of some of these major companies that have been around for 100 years. Seemingly out of nowhere, within 2 or 3 months because of economic conditions, some of these companies go out of business. So it's a lot easier for it to fall down than it is to build it. All right, so folks, listen, we're talking about generational wealth. We're talking about not destroying it. We're talking about controlling the things that we can control. For example, if you do proper planning, you can make sure that the next generation doesn't get taxed egregiously. Estate taxes are horrendous. Certain financial products that are out there have tax consequences that are horrendous. So it's always important to understand why you set up a will. And that's just the beginning of the beginning. Because remember, if at least you have a will, what you're doing is you're telling the courts what your intentions are, right? So you want to make sure that we call it post-mortem, from the grave, the money is dispersed properly the way it's supposed to be dispersed. Now, if you're ultra successful, if you have real estate in different states, you got to be careful with a will because remember, probate is on a state-by-state basis. So now all of a sudden, if you have like 5 different states where you have properties, well, then you have to go to 5 different courts in that scenario. There's ways to avoid that outside of the will, and we could have these discussions privately. Go ahead and click the link below and or ask any questions, suggestions on future videos that you want us to do. But in the meantime, a will is ultra important because it allows you to tell the world what your intentions are. And when you're in that space and you have intentionality, what begins to happen, good sound decision making comes before that. So I'll always come across entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of different types. But let me just highlight 2 of them. You'll have the entrepreneur that is so successful because they learned how to basically replace themselves. So they're no longer working in the business. They're actually working on the business. Those businesses become very valuable. Then you'll have the entrepreneur that is a super duper performer, and the whole company relies on what he or she does on a daily basis, so much so that if they go away for a week, the business could fall apart pretty fast. That's not the kind of business that you want to be able to run. So why is it important, and what is so necessary about making a succession plan for any business? But let's highlight the person that really built out a company that has replaced his or her time, scaling unbelievably, and really creating wealth that is mind-blowing. For that person, we can think about, what does a succession plan look like? There's 5 things to kind of consider. There could be more. You want the estate attorney involved. You want the fiduciary involved. You want to make sure the insurance agent involved because there's different products that are going to complement exactly what we're referring to here. But the first thing you want to be able to do is identify who the successors are going to be, right? It could be a child. It could be a nephew, niece. It could be somebody that you're mentoring. We don't know who that's going to be, but it's important that you identify them. It could be somebody that's been in your business with you from day one that's not a family member, right? But have been a sort of an apprentice. So it's important to be able to identify who that person is. And then you want to do all the planning that's going to allow for you, as you're planning this out, to embrace uncertainty and plan accordingly for uncertainty. Because, listen, there's nothing worse than when something happens that you don't anticipate, not being prepared for it, right? So usually whenever that kind of thing happens, it really comes down to liquidity, control, and access. So you want to plan for uncertainty. And then, obviously you want to make sure that, once again, this is where the accountant and the estate attorney, among other things important, is to do the tax and estate planning properly that's tied to this succession plan. And these are deeper conversations. This video is meant to just kind of plant the seed in your head on certain action steps that you have to take. Just going to give you the 5 points on it. But at the end of the day, it requires a lot more time after this. And once again, Go ahead below, add comments, add questions, click the link. If you want to meet with one of the team members at Epic, no obligation. They'll get back to you and answer any questions that you may have. You also want to be able to, as you're working on this paperwork, you got to value what the business is, right? Not only today, but what it could be worth 5 or 10 years from now, based on projections that are based on real data. The data being, how are the revenues derived? Where are the revenues coming from? Where can these revenues be interrupted if you're not careful? What is the course of action you're going to take if there is an interruption in revenues? These are the little things that have to be asked. And last but not least, you want to be able to have the transfer to the successor in the proper, most efficient way where you don't make mistakes and create a taxable event that's not necessary. When it comes to a succession plan, I just gave you 5 points to think about. There's a value, a dollar value to the information I just laid out because I gave you a little bit of structure, a little bit of a do-it-yourself. Very simply, a state attorney, accountant, insurance agent, fiduciary, get on the same page, look at your business, have all them connect, tell you what to do next, tell them your wishes, who you want to be the successor, so on and so forth. And now, like if you drop a rock in the middle of a lake, you'll get a splash. That's the immediate self. But the ripple, as it gets bigger, as it gets closer to shore, not only means that you create a good succession plan, but it also means while you're in a rocking chair, you could monetize everything you built over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. By the way, in one of my previous videos, one of our partners here that does all my videos, Danny Drew, we love Danny. Danny has a newborn son, and we were making serious jokes that he never had life insurance. Well, here's a quick update. As I understand it, Danny is actually going through the underwriting process. So that's important because Danny, as we're speaking about building wealth, and he happens to be like on the cutting edge of all these different social media channels, and people are knocking on his door because of how good he is. Our videos, if you look at me, he makes me look really good. If you saw me in real life, you might run the other way. I do have a face for radio. With that being said, and this is part of the whole wealth building concept that we're talking about, why is it important to constantly update the beneficiaries you have on your insurance policies? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Because it's outside of the will. It's a direct communication between the person that passes away and who the money goes to. For example, let's say Mr. Jones is married to Mary Jones. And for whatever reason, they get divorced. And nowhere in the divorce decree does it say that Mary Jones should be the beneficiary. 5 years later, Mr. Jones, who still has the policy, stay with me, marries Juanita Jones. Now, Juanita was never put on as a beneficiary. And this is a $10 million policy that we're hypothetically talking about. Unfortunately, 5 years after that, Mr. Jones shuffles off this mortal coil. He passes away. And by the way, if this video is 8 or 10 minutes in and you're listening, you are getting entertained right now. With that being said, if in fact Mr. Jones passes away, never took the first Jones off, never added Juanita, well, guess what? When he passes away, Mrs. Jones, the first, gets the check and Juanita doesn't get anything. And there's nothing she could do. It's like when Biggie Small said, people are trying to stick me for my papers. He was talking about his money. Juanita's going to feel that Mrs. Jones tried to stick her for her papers, but the truth is Mr. Jones did not keep the beneficiary up to speed. I also know some people who I love and adore that have children. They get into new relationships decades later and have other children. Now, if these other children aren't added to that beneficiary form on these policies, well, the first couple of kids are going to get that money, but the one that wasn't added on there isn't going to get that money. That's going to cause a lot of disruption. It's going to cause a lot of lawsuits. It's going to cause a lot of family friction. So please, for the love of God, update your beneficiary information. So folks, listen, once again, thanks for checking us out. Understand that we put a lot of time and effort into these videos. We research topics. We kind of look and see what you guys and gals out there are looking for. And the last thing I want to talk about, and just kind of think about it for yourself, not for me, is do you or why should you have someone or hire someone in your world to help organize everything I just said? Now, if you're sitting there taking notes, you realize that this is complicated stuff, right? And let's say you have a 9 to 5 and you're a dad or a mom with kids. Well, you really don't have a lot of time at the end of each day to focus on anything that we're talking about right now. Really, the truth is you really don't. So it's always important to hire the right person to help organize, yeah. And like we've said from the very beginning, accountants, estate attorneys, trust officers, insurance agents, fiduciaries, get them all on the same page. And by the way, the person you hire that can organize that can hold them accountable for you. If you're new and if you're starting out, just start out with one relationship at a time. Just one at a time, right? One of the things that we have here where we help our clients build out their own personal financial website where they can put all their data on one page. It's tied into all their financial institutions and it updates on a daily basis. That's one of the greatest aggregated organizational tools in the finance space that I've ever seen before. And that's a good starting place. Anyway, go ahead, click that link below. If you have any questions, add it in the comments. If you want us to put other videos in, please, once again, add it in the comment section. I want to thank you so much for seeing this whole video through. And remember, every day we're dropping new content to provide world-class education for you.